So today on the Hendon FC YouTube channel, something a little bit different. We're looking at the art of management at non-league level of football and how it's changed over the years. Today we've got two very special guests. We've got former Hendon manager and assistant manager, a whole host of other clubs, I think 13 others after us. We've got Dave Anderson. Dave, welcome. How are you?
Yeah, sorry. 13, was it as many as that? I think
it was 14, including us.
Was it? I've no idea, but it's a pleasure to be here, obviously.
It's lovely to see you again. And also great, of course, to see the man who had only just been born when you started your non-league managerial career. Not that we're trying to age you, Dave. It's Lee Allinson, of course. Lee, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well.
Brilliant. So it's great to have you both on. So today what we're going to do is something a little bit different. We're just going to have a look at how managing a football club, football team, assistant manager has changed in all that time. So Dave, starting with you, you were a youth goalkeeper for Northern Ireland, I think, and then had to stop through injury. Is that right?
Yeah. I got injured sort of playing back at home. I'd been over in England at Wolves and Sheffield United, and went back home. I'd been at Glentoran, was my club before I came to England, but then I got injured playing for Larne, and it's sort of, to cut a long story short, I never really could. I still have pain in the leg now, so it sort of shows you. So, but it done me a favour. I don't have any regrets, because although I got to play sort of internationally from a country, I didn't think I was a brilliant goalkeeper, but and it got me into management early.
So what was the lure of management for you?
The law of management?
Lure.
Lure. I think, and listen, it's not one thing. I would say an absolute love of the game. I still wanted to be involved in the game. To go with a big mouth and a bigger ego, I think it always sort of helps. And I want to be recognised that I understood what I was doing. I always felt like I could manage people, and enjoyed it. I think in your youth, and that you're cynical when you get this age, I actually enjoyed the game,
All right, so there's lots of clubs that we're going to talk to you about. Obviously, we're going to focus mostly on your 5 years with Hendon. Lee, slightly different for you, was it? Obviously, you were playing, your dad was playing, dad became a manager. Was your route into management through watching your dad?
Yeah, I said this to you before. I just, for me, I was probably wasted my football career, because I wanted to be a manager. I grew up in changing rooms from the age of 5 years of age. I'd go to every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday with dad and watch him manage. And, if I had training with Watford at 15 on a Tuesday and dad had a game, I'd be doing everything in my power to go and watch dad. And that was just the way it was. And I just loved it. And that's all I wanted to do. And listen, sometimes when you lose, you think, "Oh, I wish I'd have took some more care in my football career." But
sometimes,
yeah. But like Dave said there, I just think it's born in you to a degree, and you look at Dean Brennan and people like that. It's just in you. Dean could have probably had a better playing career, but he's a manager. He's a leader. And I played against Dave's team many a times. You always knew what you were going to get. Hard working, big, strong. So, for me, that's just the part of it I love. And you've seen lots of good coaches struggle at managing. And I think it's an art in managing. I really do. And it's tough, but it's something that, I really enjoy. And that's what I've always wanted to do.
So, Dave, when you were kind of starting out, did you have not kind of role models, people that you looked up to and thought, I'm going to try and manage like them? Or how was it for you?
I think as far as managers, because you look to your own career, don't you, when you first start? Because, when I'd sort of played, I'd actually played under Billy Bingham at the international thing, and got to work with people like that. So, but when I went into management, I started down in London on a Sunday side. You're then thinking about your own experience as a player. I think it takes you a while to put a foundation down to how you think about it as a football manager. So you're thinking as a player. They're two different things. And if you're lucky enough, you can be around long enough to work that out. But once I started to work with people, You know, I got to work with good people and bad people. People I love, people I hate. I'll name all of them. I'm not bothered about that. It doesn't worry me. But the biggest icon in my career, my mentor, really ended up being Bob Dowie, who obviously has a link to the club as well. He told me he showed me really how to do it. Frank, God bless him, Frank Murphy showed me that, listen, you can't enjoy this if you really want to, because he really enjoyed his time, Frank, and he was great to be around.
You were assistant manager under Frank, weren't you?
Yeah. I actually left St Albans, funny enough, with Bob Dowie to go and be assistant to Frank, because I just felt that there was me, there was Eddie Steen, Pete Lawrence. And what tended to happen when there was a big staff, I'd end up with the goalkeepers, because, and don't get me, the goalkeeper was Tony Roberts, so he's probably going to teach me more than I'd teach him. But I didn't want that then. I'd had that, so I had the chance to move to Hendon with Frank, and loved it. And obviously, you know, so I learned how to love it through Frank. I learned my mentor's really Bob, and the one that taught me how not to do it was George Borg. I worked under George. I thought I still, you know, don't like the man, you know, although he was successful. And we'll come on to that, I suppose, that there's more than one way of being successful.
Were there managers, Lee, that you've seen that you just thought, I don't fancy him, I'm not going to manage in that sort of style? Because Hendon supporters
probably not too far away, actually.
Yeah. He actually sent me some notes ahead of today, and he said that Anderson, D, I've never rated him. Actually, George Borg, most Hendon supporters have ever had a dislike for George Borg as long as we've known him. But Lee, were there people that you looked around and thought, crikey, no, not him?
No, do you know what? I've never. It's not an easy job, it isn't, and I praise anyone who goes and tries their hand at it, because it isn't easy. And I mean, listen, I was very fortunate with kind of the managers that I played under. Bar my old man, he's the only one who got rid of me. So, but the ones I played under, they all had their little traits that I really like. You know, Zima Abbey never had a coaching badge to his name. What a fantastic coach! His in-depthness to players of oppositions, and probably too much at times. You know, I was a centre midfielder, and I remember going to Stourbridge. We just got promoted. Zima gives me a sheet of paper of their team, and I'm thinking, number 4 centre midfielder, 6'4", loves a tackle. I'm thinking, oh my, this is at half 12. I'm thinking, can we turn around and go back home? So, in a way, that was probably a little bit too in depth. But you know, what a brilliant manager, Chris Nunn at Biggleswade. It was every game was a practical joke. He was unbelievable to play for. You know, we never worried about the opposition. We laughed and joked. We done Secret Santa once at 10-3, 10 minutes before the game, and that's on my life. You know, and it was fantastic. But no pressure. But you had to be a self-motivating player. That kind of manager. You know, and I sort of took traits out of all them people. They all had their problems. Dad was a shouter and a baller. You know, he loved getting into you, and that's how he felt he got the best out of people. So I was quite fortunate that I didn't really play for anyone that I thought, God, dear, you know, I could do without this. But at the same time, you know, everyone's got their strengths and weaknesses, and you try and pull apart what there is and what's good for you and what's not. And you know, but going back, you watched George Borg. I watched him last year. He was an absolute lunatic on the side of the pitch, and you try and say, I don't really want to go down that route. But you know, you can only take out what you can and try and be yourself in that sort of mould as well.
Sorry, Steve. I think that's a great point. You know, and it just brings in a Hendon story. When I was manager of the club, and Frank before me, we used to go and have lunch with Don Howe. Because Ivor, God bless him, sort of was big friends with Don Howe. And I remember it was around about the time that Keegan was doing well at Newcastle, and there was Wenger and Ferguson, all very different. You know, like Keegan was like me and your dad, you know, he'd be up and down screaming, and Wenger would be very quiet, you know, Ferguson somewhere in the middle. I remember saying to Don Howe, I wish I was a bit quieter. I wish I was a bit more... You know, I look at myself sometimes and think, he says, you have to be you.
Yeah.
He says, you know, don't mistake, you know, you can't be Arsene Wenger if that's not, so it's a point. And listen, this man, what an absolute honor to have Christmas dinner for 2 or 3 years with him. He was an encyclopedia of knowledge on the game, you know. So yeah, you're right. I think it's a big point Lee makes. It's somewhere along the line you have to be you know.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
So Dave, when you kind of started out, and when you finished a couple of years ago with Chertsey, wasn't it, with the FA Vars final, which was your football management swan song? How have tactics changed in all that time?
Oh, massively. I think the game's changed massively. I think there's listen. The positives are the pitches are better. Players look after themselves so much better. When towards the end of my career, when I took pre-season, I could nearly taken 2 weeks off it because players would turn up. You didn't need to run them; they were fit. You had to take that sort of and put it into something else. As a science, it changed. When I remember doing pre-season when I was a player, and you do cross country and stuff like that. You don't do that stuff now. You know, like Lee will tell you. But it's so all of that's changed. The characters have changed. Players are different now. You know. And I think you need to be different with them. I was fortunate at Chertsey that my dressing room was quite old school, and you know the McLarens, you know Nicky Jupp, you know Sam Murphy. Well, you know half them played for Hendon, so that they could deal with a dinosaur as a manager, which I am. Whereas younger players, I think now are different. You can't. Lee'll know this more than me, but you can't fly into them like we would in days of old. So I think it's changed massively tactically, definitely, because you know if you look at centre halves nowadays, not all of them at our level, but if you go to the top level, certainly. But if you look at the two centre halves nowadays, both of them could probably play in midfield 20 years ago. So that's how the game's developed as if you like, yeah, some of us would call it tippy tappy, you know, but I think as the pitches have got better and 3G has got better, the quality of football on the eye has got better. So that brings in more tactics. Whereas our tactics, well, Claremont Road especially, a lot of our home tactics evolved around the state of what the pitch was, and you had to get it into the last third as quick as you could, really, and play from there.
Lee, for you as somebody who's still a young man and a fairly respectfully inexperienced manager, have you found is it more difficult for you to manage some of the older players that you've looked after at Biggleswade and Hendon?
No, I find them easier. A bit like what Dave said there, you know, when they've been around it a long time, you know, as I said, you look at the fallout me and Sam Corcoran had before I become his assistant manager at St. The respect is unbelievable. You know, I don't have to manage Sam Corcoran, Kieran Forbes, Eddie Ashodi, Jonathan North. They're really easy to manage. The problem is nowadays, I feel, is you're not just a football manager anymore. You know, you have to do everything else. You have to look after them. You have to make sure they're okay mentally, physically, talk to them, give them phone calls during the week. Back when my dad was managing early doors, it was just a house phone. You know, he'd make the odd call on the house on a Sunday, and that was it. You know, see the players on a Tuesday. So now I think there's a lot more to a management. And like Dave said there, yeah, I think the problem is with the game nowadays is it's becoming more and more complicated, and you have to take the little bits out of it and still remember it's a game of football, and we have to keep it really simple, because if we don't, we can complicate it massively. And the one thing I found with the younger players is you have to keep it really simple, otherwise it becomes really difficult to get the best out of them. And you know that they are hard to manage, but at the same time, what I find hard, I don't know what it was like with Chertsey and Dave, and might have found it a bit more at AFC Wimbledon because it was such a big club. But what I find the hardest now, the younger players, the influences outside the football club, I sometimes think that they look at me like I'm absolutely clueless at what I'm talking about. Not in terms of my tactics, but when I'm sitting there and talking to them about how to look after themselves away from football, how not to play Sunday morning football, how not to get involved with YouTube footballers. If you want to be a professional, trust in the process, keep playing football. And they look at you like they've got someone else talking into them. And that's what I struggle with the most, because it's a very good level of football we play now. And if you look at a lot of players at our level, they've all been at pro clubs from a young age. They've all come through. You'll have the odd one who's a rogue that hasn't come through that system, but they're good players, and like they said, they look after themselves really well, and they're all stepping up, and the more and more Football League clubs are now coming in and taking step 3, step 4, Conference North, Conference South players. They've got a real chance, but it's really difficult. It's hard to manage some of these boys, and you have to get the right boys, and you can tell quite quickly, and I think I'm fortunate at Hendon that the boys now start to understand what we're trying to do. And the one thing I'll never, ever, ever do is stand in their way of progressing. Never, ever. If they move sideways, I've said it does give me the ump for an extra 20 quid. But if they move forward and they're progressing in their career, I want that for them. And it's the outside influences that I struggle with the most at times, because that is the hardest for me.
So
yeah,
David,
I think. Sorry, I just want to come up because there's a couple of good points in that. I think you're spot on. I think that, I've always said players move up the road for 20 quid, but it costs them 22 quid in petrol. They don't sort of get it. I think that the big difference that I got is characters. And I think, if I think back of the characters in my Hendon dressing room, if you like, they were all men. They all worked. They didn't live at home. They all worked. A lot of them were married, building sites, and Mark Cooper running successful businesses. So they could take on responsibility and hold responsibility. Towards the end of my career, not at Church, I would say, but at Harrow, when they were younger players and less experienced, they were all 25-year-olds who lived at home. So they lived at home and went to uni. So they didn't. For me, life in football goes hand in hand sometimes. So you found that they couldn't take responsibility on the pitch. You had to Lee's right. You nearly have to put their socks and boots on them on a Saturday and tie their laces to go out the door, because they don't take on responsibility, because they don't have it in their outside life. And I just found that over a big stretch of time that I managed that was part of it. Although, albeit that the players today could teach the older players how to look after themselves, how
Absolutely,
to, but, and again, the outside influences, only in the later stages do I have to deal with social media, agents,
Massive,
never ever. And I know some of them are ex-players, have never done anything for football for me. I had to deal with them a couple of times at Wimbledon. And I actually, gone back then, you can't do this now, but I remember having a meeting with an agent and his player, and I came in the room and I said to the agent, listen, I'm not signing you, so don't talk to me. Talk to him. I'm going to talk to him because that's who I want to sign. So if you want to offer him advice, don't offer it to me, offer it to him. When you have the family fallout, could you ask your mum to pass the salt? It was that. The family fallout around dinner. I went, don't talk to me. And by the way, he's paying you the fee. I'm not, but you can't do that now. Lee'll tell you, everybody's got an agent.
That's the biggest frustration for me, is that you're still paying these players as well, and at times there's no. They'll do what they want to do, and that's what I find hard. You want them to buy into what you're trying to achieve, and sometimes outside influences is a big problem nowadays. But with the older generation, when they buy into your football club, their heart and soul and everything, and nothing's moving them, and they're going to run for a wall for you. And that's what you have to try and get these younger players to do, that knowing that there's other stuff going on as well, and that's quite tough to manage at times.
Dave, you used the word characters. You must have come across, and you're one for sure, you must have come across hundreds over your career in the dressing rooms. Talk us through some of your favourites.
Oh, I think the vast majority of them were in the Hendon dressing room. I think that Hendon side that I had really, in the serious side of it is they got me the career I ended up having, that without a shadow of a doubt. But and we had a get together. It must be 3 years ago now, where we got the Hendon side and we played Windsor and Eton, because we'd been there. I'd been there for a little period. So had Mark Cooper, Steve Butler, and we got together for a day. And in the end, I talked Dale Binns out of retirement to come to Chertsey. And he ended up at Wembley when so it was a good stuff. But that day, the abuse in the dressing room would bring players today to tears. So you go through that dressing room, you go, they're easier to tell you who isn't. You go, Ian Duncan, like fruitcake, always taking the mickey out of my accent. You go, Cooper, Butler, all of them. JB, quiet man, JB, but was the leader of the gang. Randall, my God, Martin Randall's now fitter than he was when he was a footballer. Martin does like decorating and kitchen fitting and that stuff, and he did some work in my house in the last, I must say, about a year ago. He was fitting my new kitchen, and that's why this is true. He's actually said, I think he's come in the first day, and I hadn't seen him for a while, and he came in about 9, and at about 12, he's gone, Dave, you're going to have to go out so I can do some work, because we just went through games and situations, but they were all massive characters, and I suppose they needed a big mouth like me to be the sheepdog, because when you've got that sort of character, you've got to be big with it, if you have that many characters in the dressing room. But I have to tell you, as soon as they walked over the white line on a Saturday, it's the most comfortable I was ever in my career.
So great characters for you. Players that you didn't like, feel free to name them.
Who played for me?
Anybody. Yeah, but ideally who played for you.
Who I didn't like? Oh, that's a good question.
Negative influences in the dressing room.
I didn't tend to have them around long enough, Steve. I had always a good radar for people like that, and their feet didn't touch the ground. I mean, I did make some bad choices I signed Nick Roddice at Wimbledon, who had been in England international, who wasn't a bad influence in the dressing room. He just had his better days and his legs had gone a bit. I'd made some decisions like that. But if you're talking about poisoned people, and I will come back to you if I remember some, but the most poisoned person I was ever in the dressing room with was George Borg, to be perfectly honest. And I was working on his staff. But I back to you. But and I'll tell you better than that, the group of players I had in most of my dressing rooms would do it for me. When you get, Lee will tell you, when you get the right group, once the art of management is getting the group to self-manage. And I absolutely believe that's much harder today than it was 20 years ago. Again, for the reasons of character and loyalty, and Lee's right. 20, 30 years ago, when you got a player that, listen, they used to get the money off you and give it over the bar before they went home on a Saturday night. So they would self-manage. So they wouldn't have that. There was times when I'd come into my dressing room at Hendon, and there was so much noise and debate and argument going on that I used to go and pour myself a cup of tea. And by the time I'd poured the tea, half the time they'd sorted the problem out themselves, Whereas towards the end of my career, albeit that Harrow was a side at the bottom of the league, and when you're struggling, you tend to get less verbal and less confidence. But I used to come up the corridor to come into the Harrow Borough changing room, wondering if I was the first one in. It was dead, so just different stories of it, but poison people will come back to if I remember.
I think one of my favourite characters playing for Hendon, I can't remember when he was playing for him, was a very good midfield player. He used to play for Orient, called Steve Parsons. And this was in the time, I think, when Ted Hardy was manager, rest his soul. And Parsons used to turn up with a portable TV, so he could sit in the dressing room watching the horse racing before the game. It was brilliant. It was just hilarious. Every Saturday, he'd be walking in with his little telly. Lee, for you, favourite characters that you've worked in? Funny stories in the dressing rooms?
Oh, honestly, I was thinking this the other day. I mean, there's a few. I mean, we had a lad. We had two. We've got Steve-O the Madman, Kevin Stevens. He was just another level of ridiculous. Like, I can't even go into what he done. But we had a guy called Jamie Richards, and Richo was a good forward. I was with him at Boreham Wood, but he was mad, but he had a very good job in London. And his job was, he was entertainment manager. So all the big clients would come over and he'd take them out into London. So he comes in the change rooms one day and I can hear like click, click. I think, what's he got on his feet? So he strips naked. He takes all his clothes off. He's got these shoes on and black socks. He pulls up and he does a tap dance with tap dancing shoes on. and we found out that he'd been tap dancing for 6 months practicing to come to the change room and do a tap dance for us. But he would, he was another level. I mean, he met a coach once with no clothes on, rollerblades, knee pads, arm pads, helmet. He was just a fantastic character. And honestly, there's so many of them stories. There were good people, and I keep in touch with a few of them now. And but listen, some of the boys are like it now in our changing room. We've got some real good characters, the Tommy Brewers, the Sam Corcorans, and they're good boys, and you want to keep them around as long as you can, because although sometimes, the playing wise, they might have had their better days. If you keep them in and around that change room and they're happy to be a part of it, they're good people to have, and they teach them younger boys some good habits. And, and that's what you want at times, because there is a fear at some point in the next few years, you could end up with a change room of under 25s, and there's a total different change room. They'll all be sitting on their phones, and that is a worry. You've got to try and keep it fresh and lively a little bit, because it is important. It's good to have a good change room. I'm a firm believer in that.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to go back. I remembered one story you talking about. I remember I signed Rob Howarth, who again is another scream, funny guy, big centre forward. But Rob lived in Hendon, and I'd signed him from Sutton. I'm going to guess Sutton, something like that. And our lads on a Thursday night, they'd go for a curry, they'd be in the bar. Steve knows this. It was like Hendon football pub. Do you know what I mean? But we were successful with it, and I was aware of it. But it worked. But I always remember Rob getting home on a Thursday night, getting home about midnight, and his missus saying, "How come if I go upstairs and look out the window, I can see the floodlights at Hendon? How come when you were at Sutton, you'd be home at 10:30, and you're not getting home from midnight from Hendon?" And he said, "Oh, the manager's a nightmare. We have to go through this pattern of play to like all hours." But they were all in the bar, But that stuff and people, when you wind people up, but you have to be part of it. There's a line as a manager, and Lee will know this, where you have to be into it and then out of it. You can't be as much as you want to be in it all the time. That gets easier with age, Lee. As you get further away from the age of the players, then it becomes easier.
Yeah, definitely.